Hey guys, this is Scott with Truth Uncovered, and in just a few hours we will begin the Passover. But I don't want to talk to you so much not about Passover as maybe I do events that led up to Passover. One of the places I want to begin is in Ezekiel chapter 34. We can turn there. Ezekiel 34. I want to read verse 11. It said, "For thus saith," the King James is going to say, "For thus saith the Lord." So for thus saith Yahweh, "Behold, I, even I, will both search my sheep and seek them out, as a shepherd seeketh out his flock in the day that he is among his sheep that are scattered. So will I seek out my sheep." So here we have Yahweh saying that I'm going to come and I'm going to seek out my sheep that were scattered. Let's go to Matthew chapter 15, verse 24. It says, "But he answered," speaking of Yeshua, says, he answered, "I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel." So here we have Yahweh saying, I'm going to come and I'm going to seek out my sheep. And then Yeshua says, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to find, to seek out those sheep, those sheep of Israel, and bring them back to me. And that is what the story is all about. That is what he is taking place. We know that Yeshua walked the earth. Uh, One of the writers said this way: God robed himself in flesh and dwelt among us. And we can read of the miracles he did and things that he reached out and touched people's lives, the healings, and as I said, the miracles that he accomplished. But I want us to go to Matthew 26, because in Matthew 26 we're beginning to see this Passover narrative take place. In Matthew 26 we're going to find Yeshua is in Bethany, and I believe he's 2 days before the Passover. He's in Bethany. He's with his disciples. And in the room walks a lady. And in her hand she's carrying an alabaster box, an alabaster container. Something like this. Hers was probably larger, but she had an alabaster container. And in that container was a precious and expensive perfume. And the scriptures tell us that she broke the seal on that alabaster container. She poured it out onto the feet of Yeshua. And the disciples, they wondered, why was she using this on? Why was they thought she was wasting it by pouring out this upon the feet of Yeshua. But he says she's doing it for my burial. She's preparing my body. And then he goes on to say, "Verily I say unto you, wheresoever the gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also that this woman hath done be told for a memorial of her." And then we follow on down past that, and it's at this point that something happens to Judas. And he realizes in his mind that he believes in his mind that Yeshua is not the prophesied king of Israel. You see, Judas was wanting a king to come and reestablish the kingdom immediately. But when Yeshua mentions that when she opens the alabaster box and pours it out, and he says she's preparing my body for the burial, then something inside of Judas says, the plan that I had isn't going to take place. What I want isn't going to happen. And if you look on past that, it was then that he goes and he meets with the chief priest. And he says, what will you give me if I turn him over to you? What will you give me? So now, since he realizes that Yeshua is not going to set up the kingdom now, or that the kingdom that Yeshua is talking about isn't the kingdom that Judas had in mind, Judas decides that he's got to betray him. He's got to get rid of him in a way. But I want us to go down to verse 18. And Yeshua, on verse 17, the disciples ask him, where do you want us to prepare for the feast at? And he tells them, he says, go into the city to such a man, and say unto him, the master saith, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples. And once you look at it, he says, Matthew says, and you'll find such a man. Well, we're in Jerusalem. It's Passover time. Everybody's coming to Jerusalem for Passover. I'm going to say there's hundreds of thousands of people in the city. And according to Matthew, Yeshua tells the disciples, just go to such a man. Well, what man is he talking about? How can they distinguish which man that Yeshua is talking about? Let's go to Mark chapter 14. And we're going to see Mark 14 and 13. And he sendeth forth two of his disciples, and saith unto them, go ye into the city, and there shall ye meet a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him. So this is the man they're looking for, a man carrying a pitcher of water. You still may say, well, what's the big deal about it? Would they not still have an issue determining what man is carrying this pitcher of water? The answer to that question is they knew exactly what man that Yeshua was speaking about, because in this culture and at that time, men did not, you wouldn't find men carrying a pitcher of water. So they find the man carrying the pitcher of water, they follow him to his house, they tell him that Yeshua desires to keep the Passover with him. So it's coming time. Yeshua is going to enter into the city. And he doesn't sneak into the city. He makes an entrance into the city, because when people hear that Yeshua is there, they begin to run to meet him. They want to see this Yeshua of Nazareth. And so they run to meet him, and the scriptures tell us that they are throwing their coats on the road, and they're throwing palm branches, and they're waving palm branches, and they're saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now here's the thing. The scripture says that they're waving palm branches. These people, this tells us that the people that are meeting him, they're running to meet him and waving the palm branches, they have the same mentality to an extent that Judas has, because at Passover you did not wave palm branches at Passover. Waving the palm branches was saved for another feast day, and it was prophetic with them raving, and it's the Feast of Tabernacles, where Yeshua will return and will set up the kingdom of God here on earth. They were trying to usher in Yeshua being king, or reestablishing that kingdom of Israel at that time. That's what they were doing by waving those palm branches and by saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So it wasn't just a non-eventful, if I can use that word, entrance into the city. And there's more. We could go into more about as he's entering the city, the sheep are being taken to the high priest or to the temple to be judged, to be found fit. And there's a lot of things that play into this Passover scenario in the scriptures, and things that are happening at the temple at the same time. But they go into the city, they're in the room, and in Matthew 19 says, and the disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Now when the even was come, he sat down with the 12, and as they did eat, he says, I say unto you that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? And he answered and said, He that dippeth his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. So in Matthew records, he says that he that dips his hand in the dish with me shall betray me. But John gives us a little bit of a different scenario. John 13:26, and he says, and Jesus answered, He it is to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it. So this brings in an image I'm going to show you that I hope you can see. This is kind of like the table they would have been sitting at that night as they were having their meal. I want you to pay close attention to the two red squares and the two blue squares and the red one, and the yellow or green square that's in the middle. So that first blue square that you're seeing here at the end of the table would be where John sat. John would have sat there at that place. This was a seat of honor. This is a place where whoever was chosen would sit at the end of that table in that position, and they would have a sword with them. And they would sit there, and they were protecting the host of the party. If Roman soldiers were to barge in, or if other people were to barge in and try to disrupt the dinner or the meal that was taking place, this guy would be the defender of that dinner or that host. The yellow or green square is going to be where Yeshua would have sat that night. The red square we see, you probably see it in there, is there's a name on that, and that is the name of Peter. Peter sat where the red square was, and that was where the servant would have sat. That would have been the servant that was responsible for washing the feet of the people as they came in. But I want to bring something up, is that we find later on that in the garden, uh, Peter had a sword. So this tells us a little bit about Peter, how much Peter possibly thought of himself. We know by looking at the scriptures and the gospels that Peter had a problem of kind of putting his foot in his mouth from time to time, or speaking to when he should have been quiet. So here we can determine the fact that Peter had a sword with him is that Peter thought that he should be sitting where John sat. Now I want to go back to this account in John real quickly, because this also explains to us, well, because it says that there was a disciple that we know was John that leaned upon into Yeshua's chest. Now keep in mind, when we think of the Passover or the Lord's Supper, we're usually seeing the picture where Yeshua's in the middle and then the disciples are on both sides of him. And that's not the way they would have sat. As a matter of fact, they would not have even been sitting. They would have been reclining, and they would have been reclining on their left side in this fashion. So if you imagine, Yeshua makes the comment that one of you is going to betray me. And the scriptures tell us that there was another disciple that motioned for John to find out who it was. So you have all these disciples saying, "Is it me? Is it me?" And so then John leans into Yeshua and leans back and says, "Who is it?" And then Yeshua tells him, "It is the one with whom I'm going to hand this sop of bread after I have dipped it." So if we go back to this image, I told you the other blue one. So first John, then Yeshua. The third square, that second blue square, is where I would not have thought, and probably you would not have thought, this person to be sitting. And that would be Judas, was sitting on the left of Yeshua. And why I say I would never have thought him to be sitting there is the fact that this place that Judas is sitting is the guest of honor. It is probably the highest seat of notoriety. You're sitting there saying that the host thinks of you very highly and wants to bring attention to you. You are that special guest. And so what would have happened is, as Yeshua takes the bread and he dips it, he would have handed it to this guest of honor. That was their culture. The guest of honor took, it may have been the first bite, takes and tastes the bread. He didn't have a choice. So we may have thought that when Yeshua says, "One of you are going to betray me," and then John asks him which one, we may have thought that Yeshua said it out loud. It's the one that takes the bread, the one that I hand the bread to. That's it. And so then you wonder, well, why did Judas take the bread? Well, number one, I don't think that Yeshua publicized to everybody that it's the one I'm going to hand the bread to. Because I believe if he had done that when he handed the bread to Judas, Judas wouldn't have made it out of the room. The other disciples would have probably taken him down. Probably would have took his life from him had that been the case. But if you notice that Yeshua does that, and then he gives Judas the bread, and Judas takes it, and then Judas asks the question, "Is it me?" And then we know, according to John, that Yeshua tells him what you're going to do. Well, in Matthew, when he asks him the question, "Is it me?" Yeshua tells him, "You said it. It's you." And then John tells us that when he took the bread, that Satan entered into him, and Yeshua tells him what you must do quickly. And we know that Judas left the building, left the room, and the other disciples thought that he was on a mission, that he was going to get the things needed for the feast. But you and I know that Judas was on a different mission besides what the disciples thought that he was on. And then we know that Yeshua takes the place of the servant after their supper, and he takes the apron and puts it on, takes the towel, makes an apron, and he washes the feet of the disciples that night. So this is going to be a two-part thing. This first part just briefly covering what took place that night in that room. Maybe sharing with you some things you didn't know. The seating arrangement of what we know for a fact where a couple of the individuals sat that night. Why Peter had a sword with him in that garden. Uh, and why Judas took that bread and ate it. Join us tomorrow night as we go and we look at what took place in the garden and the trial of Yeshua.